There you go. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I am Mika from P1 Ventures. We are sitting at a very exciting shift as we have now, I think, a little over 96% of commercial code that is now open source. And at P1, we're really excited about the opportunity for African founders to build um, in this open source category. And we feel like there has been quite a bit of shift as well in terms of the target from, you know, building for humans now more and more to like agents. If you take a step back, for those that are not familiar, I think the open source like term was coined in 1998, and it was really like businesses like Red Hat and MySQL that were essentially offering paid support services on top of like free software. And then essentially about 10 years later, in 2008, on the backbone of cloud computing, open source software started being offered as a service. And that led to businesses like Cloudera and GitHub to be founded right around that time. And today we're really grateful to have one of the founders actually of Cloudera, Amr Awadallah, an Egyptian engineer, and one of the very first like so co-founder and CTO of one of the very first global success stories in open source software built on the Hadoop ecosystem. And Bereket Ngida is also with us today. He is an Ethiopian founder, self-taught coder, and his project BetterOS has rapidly becoming um, the authentication standard for modern AI stacks. And so I wanted to maybe start with you, Amr, since you built this foundational bricks for the data era. Um, and Bereket, understanding you or have been building now a bit more of the connectivity tissue for those agents in this new cycle that we're seeing. Um, so maybe we can start with Amr and looking at this like evolution from Cloudera, basically like 20 years ago to today. What feels fundamentally different about this like new wave of open source building for agents?
Yeah, the thanks for the introduction first. The evolution is very simply put the transformation from humans as primary interaction with the underlying systems to agents being primary. So in the 2000s, we were solving for humans and how human developers can manage clusters on the order of thousands of nodes. But today we are building for agents that interact with software at machine speed, triggering thousands of calls in seconds. So the goal is no longer a better dashboard for the human, it's more a legible system for the machine.
Thank you. And on that context, that specific concept of like machine legibility, that is really core to our thesis. But again, maybe you want to share a bit more, I mean, about like BetterOS that you've been building, and because I think you found this like existing libraries that were very complex for modern teams, and you decided to design this auth layer specifically for AI agents, in a way similar to like coding assistant, to integrate it autonomously. So yeah, how did you, as Amr mentioned, how did you decide to build for those agents with a better auth system?
Yeah, thank you for the intro as well. Um, I think like when we started Better Off, AI was not even it was not like at the level of software proficiency it is today. It was like around 2024, the start of 2024. Um, but back then AI was really good at like using existing libraries. Like it can like combine the set of like blocks together very well. Um, that actually like, led to this idea of like when you do auth, usually you'd either use a service or you would use some kind of like library that can like combine these things as Legos to build an authentication like server. So the reason that we started was like, okay, can we give like humans also people who using coding agents back then the ability to be able to use them to build their own auth servers without having to do them from scratch or without having to use a service. So that is more like AI is really good at like using existing building blocks. And especially if you have a very well tested when it comes to security, a well tested, a well implemented layer that AI can use to build a lot of custom things on top. It's actually always like a really valuable thing. And it's been always valuable for humans as well who write code. So usually those things are kind of the same. But AI can even use more things that can be like more flexible. So we being more intentional about how flexible and how customizable the framework was has helped a lot on like the adoption, especially all these people using coding agents to build their auth.
Thank you. And so there is this almost duality of users that you mentioned. Is there, did you find, and this, you mentioned simplicity that you were solving for. Did you feel like agents were more receptive to a more simple integration? Or was there other features that you catered for as you designed for agents versus humans?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like initially it was designed for agents. It was designed to be more flexible so people can build their own custom auth on top. But customizing and learning about like a library is always hard for you, like a user, especially when there's a lot of things to customize. But for agents, it's like if you give them a building block, it's always easy for them to like generate code on top within a given like architecture. So especially like as we keep going and like today as well, when we improve the library, we really like think about like, how can we help the agent to make this even more customizable? So if the like user needs to do something that we don't support yet, because usually when you build frameworks, you build for like the general public. If you can cover all use cases as much as possible. So there's like some things that you miss because you want to make it more accessible for a lot of people. But for agents now, you can customize things like much easily. So we really care about like how can we make it customizable. So an agent can customize it to like a maximum end while providing like a good building block to start with.
Yeah. And I wanted to also shift gear a little bit and talk about the data or telemetry modes. So as we all know, like so open source goes viral to like a, basically a standard sort of loop. It's like you have this issue you're troubleshooting for, you install the skit, and then you basically like um, have them like run through your data. And I think Amr, you and I discussed this quite a bit offline, and you were mentioning, I think, the velocity that is increasing in this like fast fashion, like Zara type of playbook, where um, similar to how in Zara stores you have essentially sales um, representatives analyzing what customers want and translate these data points into inputs for the fashion lines to iterate fast. Um, is there anything you may be able to share with us on how like modern open source software founders have been leveraging those communities that they built to iterate faster?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the core benefits of open source is by having the software out there, you immediately see the problems that the developers are facing. So you don't have the feedback cycle from getting feedback around something being an issue to solving it is much tighter for open source software. And that allows it to track and adapt to what the developers are doing much faster.
And have you witnessed this acceleration from the early days of founding Cloudera in 2008? And how has,
No,
do you have a
no, that's always been there. Like that's the benefit for open source software from day one, right? So from day one, one of the key benefits of open source software is the tight feedback cycle. Maybe what got better is we as companies leveraging open source, we started to react faster to the feedback coming through. But the feedback itself has been there from day one.
and Beraket, as you started building this open source community, um, how did you leverage this feedback, and how were you able to integrate it maybe faster, building an AI native stack and um,
Yeah,
leveraging this mode?
yeah. I think as Amir mentioned, like the feedback loop for open source projects is really high. We had a Discord community. Like I was really active, especially early days on Discord community. People usually like report to the like they go deep very fast. So even the early like 2, 3 months since the product was out, we've had a lot of feedbacks that we were able to fix and improve. You don't really get that chance with a lot of other like ways of releasing a product. But with open source, because the people who are using the product are very technical and kind of early adopters in general, you get a lot of like good feedback from day one that you didn't get otherwise. I mean, I've learned a lot from the community back then, even things that I didn't know about. People would open a lot of issues. They would discuss a lot of things on Discord and whatnot. Um, so it's like it's been definitely like helpful for us to be able to get that kind of feedback loop.
Was there a specific type of demographics of developers that you realized were particularly active and help build the community and um, like send more signal and feedback than others,
Yeah, that's a good
at
question.
least early on?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually like those are the people who were having like the problem today. Like when you're building open source, especially as a developer, you already kind of know the problem yourself because you're trying to build like, a solution for your own problems. So if someone who's like actively going through this challenge, especially actually like early days, I remember there was a lot of some people who were working on like more enterprisey stuff that needed some feature that was not available as an open source. That were using the product to be able to give us like some feedback. Hey, I wanted to implement this, but it's not here. It's not there. Um, like typically there are like more who are already experiencing those problems before the product was out. They tend to like jump on something and try things out. But in general, like most developers who are not maybe like working in a big tech or something, they're usually open to trying new things, and you get a lot of like early adopters super easily compared to other kind of market segment.
And did you target those specific developer demographics, or did it just organically flow?
I think it was like for most parts organic. We had like a again like another advantage is like you get a lot of word of mouth with the developer community if you build anything useful. So we had it was mostly like organic and people just recommending one to another to try the product out.
Thank you. And maybe I wanted to just go back on one other big theme that we've been discussing at P1. I mean, I think one of the recurring theme that we had was that the saying, I think, necessity is the mother of invention. And whether you're an Egyptian or an Ethiopian founder, and you're building typically in a more capital constrained environment compared to like the Bay Area, that is a bit more resource affluent. And both of you started your entrepreneurial journey to some extent on the continent. I mean, I know Amr spent years in the Bay Area and for education, if I'm not mistaken, first at Stanford, and then uh, selling your first business to Yahoo, and then basically taking on Cloudera. And I'm wondering, as you navigated both of those environments, um, how did you two sort of thought of balancing resource constraints with creativity? And I'm in particular, like I'm curious, as you experience sort of the first cloud mega trend, um, how did you think about managing teams to build the most resilient like systems?
Yeah, so I like the saying that you started with, which is necessity is the mother of invention, because that is essentially what happens here. So, but that's true everywhere. I don't think that's just unique to Africa. It's wherever you have a scarce capital. There's plenty of capital here in the Bay Area for investors, for startups, way more than any other place on earth. So depending on where you're raising your capital from, you might end up with a lot more less than a peer company building the same thing over here. So you can't afford to build bloatware. You cannot afford that. You need to be super optimizing everything you're working on. You design for the most efficient path. So this is why you see African founded teams like Axiom or Cerebrium building low latency systems that often outperform actually, not just perform as well as, but outperform better funded US rivals. It's because they had to. It's not because they had no choice. They had to super optimize the critical path. So that allows these companies, including ours, to leapfrog older, more bloated technology stacks that did not have the same resource constraints that we had. For Cloudera, when Cloudera was started, actually the cloud was starting. The cloud was not already established at that time. Despite the name being Cloudera, the cloud itself was still being built. So Cloudera, we had to learn how to work with legacy, a bunch of servers, and you connect these servers together to get them to perform well. There's no question that when the cloud, as we have it today, became available, that made it a lot more easier for companies with limited funding to compete with companies that have plenty of funding.
Thank you. No, this is really, really inspiring, and I think it's an interesting one to contrast maybe with Bereket's experience. Bereket was Better Off also founded at a similar time, like early on, as as Cloudera was founded before the cloud mega trend. I mean, is it fair to say that also Better Off was founded before like Gen AI really took on, or the agents became mainstream? And how did you think about managing um, constraints and spotting sort of the 100x engineers that you needed to scale?
Yeah, I think my story, sorry, my story is a bit different in terms of like constraints, but I agree with Amir, like, always necessity actually is actually something that brings innovation. For me, that necessity was like I wanted to have auth that works in my like app without paying for a service, right? And maybe I wouldn't want to do that like if I was in a Bay Area and that's not like, a constraint that I had. I could have just paying any money on like using any service and whatnot. Um, I think in terms of like resources, like this was more of like an open source project that I was trying to like build instead of like a business that I was thinking about. And it only took me, which is not like that much resource was required for me to build an app. I just needed to like stay at my mom's house. But for most part, like I was able to build most of the software at my house. I think the other thing I would say, maybe like the biggest thing that helped me was I kind of figured out there is a distribution path within X. Like I posted a lot on Twitter, and that was like a distribution path that I saw before even building the product. I was like, okay, if I build something really good and post it there, there's a huge chance it could actually like take off and people would start thinking about it, and from there it could go somewhere. Because I've seen other people do the same thing. So I think at least in my era, like there were other channels where you can reach a lot of developers wherever you are. I mean, I think it was true even like back then, but now even there are many developers online that you can just reach to them as long as you build something that's like meaningful. I think the resource constraints are not that big, especially if you build something in open source and something that you can do yourself. Um, until you want to make it a company. For my case, when I was trying to make a company, I actually was able to move out to SF and like was be a part of YC, which is like kind of remove the constraint for me. Um, Maybe that was not an option back then, but I think now those options actually gives you more ways to grow as a company.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think it's a very good like growth hack, like thinking distribution first, and like I think X is one of those channels that could be really relevant to target like developers, and I think it's a really inspiring journey from Addis to YC, and the whole like. Do you mind maybe sharing a bit more about the latest developments, maybe of Better Off for the audience?
Yeah, maybe this kind of exclusive like announcement. I mean, we're working on a lot of things. I think now that we're like under a bigger company, we have a lot of resources to be able to focus on, like for me especially, to focus back on building a product. So we're working on like another version of Better Auth. We've never released like V2. I think we're working on a V2 version now. So version 2 of Better Auth would come out. I've been like researching a lot and like working on a lot of like protocols and things for uh, figuring out how identity and auth works in the like agent era, which still like is an active problem. So we're working here like to solve like those problems by partnering with other companies and also seeing like what we can do personally, and also just talking to other people in the same space as well. And hopefully like we will have like some product or solutions out soon on top of like Better Auth as well.
All right, thank you. We'll stay tuned, and really appreciate the background here. And I think, look, as we wrap up again, very grateful for both of you to make time today. And I think I walk out like feeling that African founders are no longer just participants, but more and more starting to shape this agent first era. And I mean, we've seen, I think, a couple of years ago, actually, one of the first acquisitions in by uh, by a leading biotech companies called BioNTech, actually listed on Euronext, acquiring InstaDeep, that in many ways is the AI infrastructure open source company, at least started this way. And so we're seeing now more and more precedents for companies, started on the continent, like BetterOff, like InstaDeep, and many others that Amra shared, that I think are shining bright on a global stage. And so very grateful again for Amr to, be one of the very first pioneers in the space. And maybe I'll hand it over to you, Amr, for one last closing remark.
No, I mean, first a second, what you just said about the African founders. That Africa is too big to be ignored, and we see the evidence. We see the evidence of all of the companies being acquired here by many of the large model companies. So it's proof that this is happening, and it's something that we need to all be paying attention to. Last but not least, I mean, another thing that's very clear, that a good area for a lot of the listeners to be investing their time in, looking at building for, is one of the key things happening with this new wave. Is this new wave is not about just building for humans. It is about building for humans. At the end of the day, you are building for humans. That's how you make money. But you're also building the operating system for AI agents that are scaling up way faster than us as humans, and would outnumber us in terms of their usage of the underlying platforms. So these are two great areas to invest your time in, to see what to build, what next great thing can be built.
Thank you so much again, Amr. I really appreciate you joining from space, and you, Barakat, from the beautiful Better Earth office.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Maiga. Thanks.
Thank you again.
Bye.